Welcome back to All Politics Are Local, America's number one political hip hop radio talk show. We are here back with another week which saw the passing of a brilliant genius, Toni Morrison, a week that saw like shootings of other Americans in El Paso and in Ohio, and Trump doing what Trump does best. We have a week where we have stuff going on in our own community where we have like the we had shootings in Newark today, and I'm looking at the headlines, and we have right after that Menendez is here talking about other types of violence inside of here. So we've had a week this week. So, welcome to All Politics Are Local. I'm here with Ed Riley to my right. I'm here with DJ Rhino, our wonderful interns, for another week. We know that Midi Baraka is supposed to be here as well. And Ed, is he?
He's on his way.
He's on his way. And we have, because this is the second Friday of the month. We know on the second Friday, it's the show, The Vote. And the show, The Vote, we are focused on issues of electoral politics, Black people in terms of the country, and what really is going on in terms of like this nation, and what are the things that we are actually need to fight for all over the country, right? Like that people, like there are people that there are things that are going on all over that need our attention and some thoughtful dialogue on that. So Mini Baraka will be joining us shortly, but we have amazing guests on with us right now. We have our very frequent co-host, Conrad Tillard, longtime friend of the program, co-host. He was a hip hop minister. He was a minister, activist, has been that way for many years. Legendary activist in New York City, has his own radio program. Say hi to the people, Conrad Tillard.
Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Grace and peace.
And thank you for coming on the show. We have an amazing guest host today. Guest host today. We have Alicia Garza. Alicia Garza is the co-creator of the Black Lives Matter Network. She is the strategy and partnership director of the National Domestic Works Alliance, and she is a principal of the Black Futures Lab. She has also been working on, and this is going to be the subject of what we're talking about tonight, the Black Census Network. Very welcome, Alicia Garza.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. So we're here with another week, and we are talking. And you have like I looked online at the Black Census Network, and I looked at some of the things that you were that was, and I was just so impressed. What is the Black Census Network?
The Black Census Project is the first project that the Black Futures Lab launched last year when we created our organization. And we did so because what we know is that Black people are often spoken about, but we are rarely spoken to. And that has impact when it comes to politics. Because if you're not talking to the Black community about what we experience in the economy, in our democracy, in our society, then you can't really hope to have policies or legislation that is addressing from our experiences and from our perspective what needs to happen in our communities to address some of the changes that we want to see. And so we set out to talk to as many Black folks as we could. We teamed up with more than 30 Black-led grassroots organizations across the country. We looked at where Black folks are concentrated throughout the country, and then we looked at Black folks in our communities who are often marginalized from conversations about Black people or Black politics. We made sure that we teamed up with the largest online civil rights organizations, like Color of Change, like Push Black, to make sure that the survey could get out that way. But then we also trained organizers in every community in 28 states, 106 Black organizers, not just to administer the survey, but to learn the tips and the tools of community-based organizing to be able to build their infrastructure so that wherever they are, they can work to help make Black people powerful in politics. And what we found is that we are now the largest.
I'm sorry, continue.
The largest survey of Black communities in America in 154 years.
Wow, so you are the largest survey of all surveys and studies of Black America. We know more about what's going on in Black America from what you're doing than any place else.
That's correct.
And how did you?
And then,
No, continue.
well, I was just going to say, and in New Jersey, we teamed up with organizations like BLM Patterson, who helped us collect data and also worked with us to help train organizers. So what I brought today for our conversation is some of the information that we learned from the Black census respondents who are in New Jersey. So I'm excited to share some of those results.
Oh, and we are anxious to hear them. Like I think, because, yeah, well, I mean, because yeah, we're anxious to hear them because like what you're talking about, like it's kind of like reminds me of Du Bois and what he did in Philadelphia, but you're doing it for the entire country using grassroots movements from all over the country in order to do this. Like how many people?
Exactly how it was inspired. I read Black Reconstruction, and Du Bois is amazing. I mean, he literally was pouring through all of these data points, right, from Reconstruction, doing so in a library that didn't actually allow Black people to study or work there. So he was doing that in the basement of a library and created an epic document that really tells us a lot about the promise and the failures, right, of that 12-year period where people who were enslaved were quote unquote newly emancipated by the United States government. And they did a deep survey of what it was that those communities needed in order to be able to live well. And our survey is very similar to that. Although our demographics have changed greatly, what we know and what we are kind of shocked by is that with just 30,000 respondents, that we could be the largest survey of Black communities in America.
You know, I was going to ask that. I was going to ask how much, like,
Going beyond that.
I was going to ask a real geek question about methodology, and I was going to say, like, well, how many people did you survey? And you said 30,000?
30,000, a little more than 30,000 were surveyed and had complete responses. There were actually many more people who started the survey and didn't finish, and things like that. But the 30,000 number, a little bit more than that, about 30,800 or something like that, were people who completed the entire survey.
So, but this does seem like a basis for future surveys that would even get even more extensive, because it seems like you put together an incredible grassroots network throughout the United States.
Absolutely, and we've also we custom built a database to hold this information. The mobilizing partners that we worked with and that we invested in not only get to have access to the data that they collected, but they also get access to the national data that was collected. And the reason that we did this project is not just to prove a point, although that was important for us, right? We wanted to make sure that our communities were being engaged with about what it is that we care about from our own mouths. But we also wanted to make sure that this project was a tool of empowerment for the community organizations that have been working tirelessly day in and day out to help make Black people powerful in every aspect of our lives. And so much of what we do in grassroots organizations, and I know this because
You're in a lot of them. You have organized and you lead many of them.
But the way I cut my teeth in organizing was in a grassroots organization in Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco, which you'll see featured in the movie The Last Black Man in San Francisco. That's the community I learned how to organize in.
Wow.
And I can say that, what's really important is that oftentimes, Black people who are trying to make our communities better often get told that we're serving rhetoric rather than real experiences.
Yeah, y'all talking, but you're not doing nothing. Right?
Exactly. And what we hope this survey does is actually add recent, relevant, quantitative, and qualitative data that backs up what it is that Black communities are experiencing. But bigger than that, what are the changes that need to be demanded of the people who are designing laws and policies that are impacting and shaping our lives?
Because often the politicians who make the laws are not connected to the people's lives. What did you find out in New Jersey? Like you've done, like, New Jersey, you're here. What did you find out? What's shocking? Let's talk about it.
Well, let's share, yes. So, of the survey, we had about a little more than 500 respondents from New Jersey. And, we asked a wide range of questions. You know, those questions were related to how familiar people were with certain figures, what issues they thought were important to them, how politically active they are or are not, and why. What motivates them, what they think about politicians, and how they are engaging with Black communities or not. And so I can tell you that of those 538 respondents, here's some of the things that we found. And I picked these data points because they seem very relevant given the current day's news. 70% of the Black census respondents from New Jersey found Trump to be unfavorable. 20% of the Democratic Party that they had an unfavorable view of the Democratic Party. 50% of our respondents said that they had a favorable view of the Democratic Party. When we look at the Republican Party, about 32% of respondents who said they saw the Republican Party as unfavorable, and it was about 2% of respondents who said that they found the Republican Party favorable. Let me skip here to who said and who felt that politicians really cared about Black people. In our national survey, what we found was that overwhelmingly, that when you asked Black communities of all stripes, do you think that politicians care about you or your life? The majority of Black people nationally said no.
Wow.
In Jersey, 57% of Black census respondents said that politicians do not care about Black people. 86% said that politicians care about white people a lot, and 95% of Black census respondents said that politicians care about rich people a lot. This is an interesting conversation in a political context where Black communities and our votes are being courted very judiciously.
Now, I want to bring in. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to bring in two of our our co-hosts, Conrad Tillard and Tamika Mallory, organizer of the Women's Movement, nationally recognized organizer, is also on the line. Hi, welcome, Tamika Mallory, and jump in if you have questions, because the information, Alicia Garza, that you're giving is just incredible.
I'm here, and thank you again so much for having me on. I'm just listening. This is very it's great information. So I'm really just sitting at the teacher's feet listening.
Yes,
Hi, my
it
sister.
is.
It's good to hear you.
It's good to hear you too, sis.
So
I wanted to say as I was listening, this is wonderful news. First of all, we've had a long tradition of people who have tabulated this information, people like Eddie Williams, the Joint Center, and of course, one of my mentors, Ron Walters. So to know that there's another generation that is engaged in this quantitative stuff, as you correctly pointed out, Du Bois in Philadelphia, Negro, all of this is very, very important. And I'm happy that she's from San Francisco because in Bayview, my old colleague, Minister Christopher Muhammad, used to have me running around Bayview. Yeah. So we go way back in that community. But I will tell you that, first of all, those statistics you gave me, gave us, to do two things for me. It fortifies my faith in the common sense of African American people, because it shows that Black folks have more sense than people think. With many of those answers, they seem to be right on it. The community folk, not so much the pundits, but the community folks seem to understand that politicians are concerned about money and power. And so that is a very positive development that our community is thinking clearly. You mentioned the fact that with just 30,000 surveys, you have the largest database of information with African Americans. But that's nothing to sneeze at, because it's like, for example, the Final Call newspaper with a circulation of about 100,000, at least at one point, not too long ago, every 2 weeks, was the largest circulated African-American newspaper in the country. So we have to start somewhere, and I think this is just great work and invaluable in terms of what you're doing.
I really appreciate that. And I can tell you, Minister Christopher is one of my greatest teachers. And so if he's out there listening, hi, Minister Christopher, listening to you.
Yeah.
Great, Dan. I also would like to share some additional information that I think is important from this survey. I think, you know, we are, as I was saying, we're in a context where Black votes are being hoarded, yet Black issues are not being addressed. And so this is why you see candidates showing up to places like South Carolina, or showing up to places like New York, or showing up to places where they think Black people are. But what they're doing is engaging Black communities culturally and stylistically, but not substantively.
Like when Hillary Clinton put hot sauce in her bag.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly what we found in our survey. So of the respondents, for example, and I know Senator Booker is from the great state of New Jersey, so let's just throw in some stats about his perceptions. 42% of Black census respondents in New Jersey said they had a favorable opinion of Senator Booker. 9% said they had an unfavorable opinion of Senator Booker. Comparatively to Senator Harris, 21% of Black census respondents said they had a favorable perspective of Senator Harris, and 7% said they had an unfavorable perspective of Senator Harris.
And a lot of people just didn't. Oh, you continue, please.
Go ahead.
No, continue. No, I was just going to say that there's a huge number that just didn't have any opinion whatsoever.
Sure. And actually, we did this survey before we knew that either of them were running for president. We chose those two figures because they are the only two Black people in the Senate, in the entire United States Senate. And so we also asked about folks on the Republican side. We asked about Tim Scott, we asked about Nia Long, and there wasn't very much familiarity with those folks.
Didn't know who they were. Right, the Black Republicans now.
I don't know who that is. I don't have an opinion because I don't know who those people are. When it comes to issues, the major issues that New Jersey said were keeping them up at night, Black census respondents being kept up at night, 93% of Black census respondents said that low wages that are not enough to support a family is a thing that keeps them up at night and is a major problem. That is comparable to our national survey as well, but certainly the responses from New Jersey are a higher percentage. 85% of our respondents said that police killing Black people is a major problem.
Yep.
As compared to 8% who said it is only a minor problem. When we look at guns and gun violence and guns killing people, 84% of Black census respondents in New Jersey said that this is a major problem. You could also imagine that the other top issues in New Jersey were access to affordable health care at 82% of respondents saying that's a major problem. Access to affordable housing, 80% of Black census respondents saying that's a major problem. Schools, so when we're talking about the lack of quality schools and rising college costs, 88% said that the lack of quality schools was a major problem. 84% said that the rising cost of college is a major problem. So I want to take a little bit of a step back here because when we look at, there's a ton of other issues underneath there that folks kind of described their experiences with, whether or not they thought they were a major problem and what they wanted to see happen about them.
Because that's part of that would be part of my other question about it. Like there's a list of problems, but do we ever, is there a like when there was like the crack epidemic, when there was like a huge outpouring for crime, and then that spurred crime legislation that was pretty negative to our community. Is there anything that when you're talking about solutions that starts to deal with that? Like whether it be when there's demand for gun legislation, that means that black men specifically, will be targeted and being brought more to jail for that, or domestic terrorism legislation that will target your organization or many of your organizations, or like they did Black Panthers before. Is there any thought to how that this can be used, or how you want this to be used to talk about solutions?
Absolutely. So what we did was we asked people directly what solutions they wanted to see to the problems that they identified. And what we found was actually fairly interesting. And I will tell you that, for example, in response to low wages being that are not enough to support a family, being a major issue that are keeping Black families up at night in New Jersey, what we found here was that 77% of Black census respondents in New Jersey favored increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, strongly favored it. 15% favored it. So overall, 92% of Black census respondents said the way to deal with low wages that are not enough to support a family is to increase the minimum wage to what would be considered a living wage.
And I think thanks to Brittany Timberlake, that actually passed in New Jersey. She's an assemblywoman. She's an assemblywoman from East Orange.
Represent. But on the other hand, when it comes to issues of crime and violence, actually the respondents are split. And I think what we can take from that is that crime and violence is one of those issues that not only have our communities been organizing around, but our opposition has been organizing around it as well.
Right.
Because as soon as you start to hone in on things like access and availability to guns, right, you get major multi-billion-dollar corporations stepping into the conversation and saying, well, let's have a different conversation than the one we're having.
Let's talk about video games. Right.
Exactly. Let's talk about video games. Let's talk about mental health. But we don't want to talk about background checks because that's too much of a barrier to accessing these kinds of weapons. On the other hand, Black communities also have a visceral response to being told that we are going to be locked out of access to something that we have had to use to protect ourselves from white supremacist violence and other forms of domestic terrorism.
Gil Scott-Heron, when they give up theirs, I'll give up mine.
Right.
That's what it
and so I think what we expected from the Census Project is that two things. One, it was important to us to be able to survey people from a wide range of political perspectives. We did not just want to talk to Black communities who had a progressive perspective, a radical perspective, or even a liberal perspective.
Right.
So you'll see in the sample size, about 31% of our respondents identified as progressive. A smaller number of those people identified as liberal, but then 15% of our respondents actually identified on the conservative side of the spectrum, whether that be a fiscal conservative, whether it be a conservative full out, whether it be a social conservative or a constitutionalist. There was a nice range there, right, of political perspective.
So in other words, you went to the cookout. You went to the cookout and you took surveys. You went to the whole cookout.
We did.
And you were like, hey.
We sat at the Thanksgiving table and we had a conversation like what happens in our homes during the holidays. And what we thought was really important about this tool is that this is what we think can and should influence and impact our movement and change the way that we organize. Understanding that even though Black people are dope, we are not all progressive on issues. And so that's not something to shy away from. It's actually a place to go deeper and to do deeper and more strategic organizing. And crime and violence is one of those places where, quite frankly, progressives have lost the debate on how to deal with crime and violence when it comes to Black people.
Can you say something more about that? You said that the community, your survey, produced a split result. What do you mean when you say split? Could you clarify that a little bit more?
Sure, I'll give an example. So, and I'll actually use the actual data from New Jersey. In our survey, you have a large number of people saying that police killing Black people is a major problem.
Okay.
That when you ask Black census respondents in New Jersey how to deal with that problem, 13% strongly favor hiring police officers to provide security in schools, and 25% favor hiring police officers in schools, right? That is actually almost equal to the people who said that they opposed it. And so actually right there, you have a bit of a contradiction. You're saying, I have a problem with police killing Black people, but yet you're inviting police into schools where Black people are to provide security. And so we've got to be able to deal with that contradiction and not run away from it or skip over it.
And yeah, and actually that speaks to the complexity within our community. One of my an associate of mine who's getting her doctorate is actually studying the issue of police in schools, and she was like taken aback when she was serving kids, and kids actually felt more comfortable with the SRO. Those are the armed police officers that were actually in their schools. And she was like, I don't know how to deal with this. Are the kids brainwashed? What's going on? And it took a longer conversation to see like, well, where do the kids feel insecure? How are these officers trained? They don't ever show their guns. They're actually maybe trained in a way that is like more positive, like they're not police, they're more like extensions of teachers and how they're approached. So it's a lot of complexity with that. So I appreciate you bringing, I appreciate understanding that sometimes the numbers will lead you to conclusions that you have to back away from and just talk about.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we shouldn't be scared of those conclusions.
Absolutely, because I'm curious what Tamika Mallory's view is in light of her activism, particularly her demographic. What do these numbers say to you?
I mean, they sound very familiar when you're on the ground and you're talking to people. You hear all of this, and certainly, I think it's very true that all Black folks, we're just not a monolith. Like, we all have different perspectives. I was just thinking about my own family and how people who are wealthier in my family are definitely more conservative. They don't want to see, our brothers and sisters being killed by police. They don't want to see mass incarceration continue, to be an oppressive aspect of the Black experience. They don't want to see those things, but they also really appreciate people who speak to their financial situation, in a way that protects them and that makes them feel like, all that they have worked for is being protected and that they're taking away the most of their money and their resources. And I often have debates with them about what does this mean for people who are being paid $15 an hour, and even in talking to restaurant owners, business owners who are Black folks, they have challenges with the minimum wage being increased. They have challenges with the healthcare and other issues. And so it just sounds very, very familiar. But I think that at the foundation of the conversation, there are going to be things that all Black folks, really pretty much most Black folks, the majority of Black people agree with. And again, those are things that are about the fundamental values and the sanctity of life. So certainly, it sounds really familiar. And it's just good to know. I want to just join you, Brother Conrad, in saying that 30,000 is not a number to sneeze at. I mean, that's a very strong number. I don't know anyone else that has 30,000 Black folks that are being engaged in a deep conversation and in a depth conversation about problems, solutions, and really giving Black folks the opportunity to express, things that, as far as I'm concerned, it may only be 30,000, but that represents probably 100,000 of our people, because as Black folks are in our homes, we have these discussions, and I'm sure that these data points are based upon multiple opinions and feelings within families and in our community. So I think I would just say I tip my hat to you for the work that you all have done.
And I'd even add to that, because most of the studies that are done on Black people have like maybe 1,000 people, maybe like 500 people. I've seen studies done on black people that have 100 people, and they draw these large conclusions from. So you got 30,000. That's a mega study. That's nice.
And you have to actually love the people that you're polling. That is what makes the difference between other polls and this poll, because it has failed, and instead it's been extremely successful because the brand, the people behind it are folks that black people can identify as those who are really out here in the trenches fighting for their community.
True.
One of the things that struck me just hearing your conclusion of what Tamika said. See, if you're out in the community, if you are actually working with people in the community, none of this sounds strange because, black people, if you set up in a barber shop, a beauty shop, if you're on the corner at a bus, or in a restaurant, you go into the schools and talk to young people, you see this broad diversity of opinions. The range from liberal, progressive, conservative, and there should be another category, I'm sure, where a great number of people, just common sense people, aren't really ideological at all, when they sort of really evaluate each issue and they deal from a common sense perspective. But that is at great odds with what the political conversation is, because in terms of the politicians, particularly on the Democrat side, they have been dominated by ultra liberals and quote unquote progressives, which even the terminology progressive, I consider myself a progressive person on many issues. I'm about progress, but I don't subscribe to the coterie and I don't check the boxes of what is commonly regarded as progressive today. And I think that when you have black politicians and white politicians that have bought into this progressivism, which I have said for many years is more a function of Harvard than Harlem. Many of these progressive ideologies come from professors that are glib, like Dyson and people who work at Georgetown, and they have basically packaged white elite culture, not even white working class culture, white elite culture. It has been drummed into young people and it has become cachet and popular. But when you really get into the trenches and talk to people, there's a wide range of views that varies far and wide from that. And I think the Democrats have made a mistake. I think that as they keep becoming more and more quote unquote progressive and not hearing the voices of people. I mean, when you just say $15 an hour, okay, that sounds good in New York if you're talking to Wendy's or McDonald's, okay? But when you're talking to a black mom and pop operator of a restaurant, the question invariably comes back, okay, how am I going to pay for this? So I think we need to be very careful and do a deep dive on some of these policy issues that sometimes we began to embrace and champion. Lastly, I want to say it doesn't surprise me at all that the number one issue for black folks, particularly in New Jersey, New York, and this region, and it's going across the country soon, is the cost of living, because people are struggling trying to just keep their head above water, education, good schools, and being able to afford college. So those stats seem right on target in terms of what I hear from my congregation and the people I move and talk to in New York City and around the country.
Now, for Lisa, how do you want this to be used, right? Like, how do you want, like the current politicians who are running for president or politicians who are running for assembly, how do you want them to use the information that you and your organization are finding?
Well, first and foremost, I want them to use it, because what I continue to be frustrated about, and I hear this from people in my community as well, is that at the end of the day, we have to actually treat Black communities like we have a suite of issues that need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed in a particular way because of the pervasiveness of structural racism, which is just racism. When we talk about things like the $15 an hour minimum wage, You're absolutely right that a black mom and pop shop might oppose something like that because they're trying to figure out how would I pay for it. But they're not opposed to making sure that black people's wages are high enough to support their families. They just don't want to have to go out of business to be able to make that happen. And that is actually a structural question that I think our movement doesn't deal with and doesn't call for change around. So,
What do you mean by structural question?
I'll give a quick example. When candidates come to Black communities, the things that they talk about are home ownership, they talk about entrepreneurship, and they talk about wealth generation. But they don't talk, right, to Black folks about who are wage earners, right, about corporate accountability. They don't talk to the mom and pop who was able to start their own business about why it is that there are not structural supports for that Black family to be able to not only have a business, but grow their business. And so there are some parameters that I think, because of racism, people don't actually dive into. And what we end up getting is surface responses to structural problems. You cannot home ownership your way out of poverty. You cannot entrepreneurship your way out of poverty, especially when the economy is dominated by white capital.
So you're saying if I don't have no capital, I can't have no business. And I just can't go out and buy a house because I'm broke. I don't have 20% for a down payment.
Period. And if you can't even access those programs where they're putting aside a little bit of money for families that are just below the ability to access a house or access capital to start their own business, then you're really not having a conversation about Black communities. And so what we would like to see happen with this data is that not only can our communities really dive into this to evaluate our own strategies around how we think our communities are talking about the issues that they are impacted by and what they want to see done by them. But ultimately, what we would love to see is legislators and people who are running to lead this country deeply understand what is contained in this data, which is it's a reflection of not only how complex Black communities are, but it's a reflection of what legislators and policymakers should actually be doing. They should be talking to the people that we did and using the methodology that we did to access better solutions, not just for Black communities, but for all communities. We went into prisons and jails and surveyed people who are currently incarcerated, and we surveyed people who are formerly incarcerated.
Wow.
We surveyed people in rural areas and urban areas. We surveyed people who were wealthy and people who were poor. We surveyed people who were immigrants to this country, Black immigrants to this country, and people who were born here in the U.S. We also interviewed people who, identified as lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender. And we interviewed people who did not identify that way. And the reason that we did that is because we want politicians to take as seriously our communities as we do. When we sit at our dinner tables on holidays or even just on a regular day, we understand the complexity of our community, and we know to move our families forward, there is no silver bullet, right? We have to put in the work to figure out where we can all come together and how it is that we deal together with the problems and the challenges that we face. And we think that that is actually what democracy looks like. And so that's what we want to be done with this data.
It's interesting because it seems like politicians can use it, but also community activists can use it. I have a question for both Tamika Mallory and for Conrad Tillard, Reverend Tillard. How would you use this information for the various advocacies that you do within our communities? How can the Black census help you?
I think one of the things is when we're having conversations with these politicians and we're trying to figure out who has the best plans for policy as it relates to issues that Black people care about, I would say that we could use this information to really be able to drill down on specifics. I think that's one. I also think that when we're trying to organize our people, sometimes we're bringing issues to them that are important. I think everything is important. I think climate change is important. There's a lot of issues. However, it's difficult to get people to focus on climate change when they're worried about whether or not they're going to be stopped and killed while they're
pay their rent and utilities and being cut off and everything.
Exactly. And all of those things. So we can also be able to really focus and center the conversation with our people around what we know really touches them and what really motivates them. And perhaps that will help us to get more people to join the fight and also give them an opportunity to be able to articulate their issues when they're being approached by, different organizations, different political folks. I think the data will be really helpful to get our people focused and clearly able to discuss the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, and I think, number one, we need to speak with a clarion voice, instead of Pete Buttigieg coming to Harlem and having waffles and chicken with Al Sharpton. They need to be sitting down with these think tanks and sitting and going to forums with this organization and engaging this kind of information, because invariably, this is going to give you a greater insight into what African Americans are concerned with. And I think the problem in the Democrat Party is that, I love Donna Brazile. I love, whoever. I mean, whoever's the inside player, Leah Daughtry, all these people, fine. I love these people. They know a lot about the Black community. But the Democrats have become so arrogant that, when we talk to Al, we know what Black people want. And that's far from true, because, as I said, we're not a monolith. And for every person that admires one of these leaders, there's at least one, if not several, that don't admire them. And so I think this kind of empirical information, this data is certainly more reliable. And I think we need to push and challenge these elected officials. Have you heard of this survey? Have you read this? Do you have this information? And, because really, to be honest with you, I'm shocked, because I know that the empirical process is very important. And in many ways, it gives us a deeper insight. But really, anecdotally, everything you said, you hear that on the street. So if you're in the community on the street, you kind of have a sense that this is what people are saying. But I think that there's a gulf between those who are actually in the community and those that are sitting down in these rooms when policy is being discussed. And we got to make sure that this information gets in these rooms, absolutely.
Now, I absolutely love when you were saying?
Well, yes. I mean, I could not agree more, and I appreciated both Sister Tamika and Brother Conrad. I appreciated your feedback and your insights. I think that what we are headed towards right now is using this data to help inform a legislative agenda. Because at the end of the day, we've now had this data out for about a couple months now. And I can tell you there are some campaigns that have been reaching out to us, wanting to know more, wanting to know how it can inform what they're doing. But the thing that we keep bumping up against with each of them is that at the end of the day, it still ends up being us chasing them to listen to us, as opposed to them chasing us to show us how down they are with our agenda.
Okay.
And so
they're treating you like Al Sharpton as opposed to. So they're treating you like Al Sharpton as opposed to. Right.
Fried chicken, with policy, is by actually addressing what could a comprehensive agenda based on this data look like. And then for us, we want to actually make sure this is not something that just gets developed in a back room, but that it goes back out to community and people can say, yes, that agenda is what I want to see. So what it ends up being is that the community endorses the agenda, and then we get to evaluate how the candidates show up in relationship to that agenda. So I appreciated, in particular, Sister Tamika, how you articulated, what the problem is in terms of the gap between how communities feel connected or not connected, or even in relationship to what's happening at the presidential level. And some of that has a lot to do with both people trying to make ends meet and, get to live another day. And some of it has to do with the fact that we show up time and time again, and you really don't have to keep telling us to show up, but you can only show up so many times and not have your issues addressed before you just decide it's not worth it. And so that's the thing that we are also trying to intervene on. And we think that building a legislative agenda from this data that reflects not only trends nationally that we see in the survey, but also that gets into some of those contradictions, right? It can make it be used as an organizing tool in a different kind of way.
And when we talk about data, there's also the interpretation of data that you're talking about in terms of building legislation. Is there something within the organization that is like leading toward a Black think tank, putting out position papers, trying to control that interpretation? Because one of the things I fear is that certain white politicians will interpret the data and be like, and bastardize it, like what happened in the 1994 crime bill.
Yes, well, certainly in just a few months, we are going to be ready to launch what we're calling the Black to the Future Public Policy Institute. And that is where we will be training cohorts of Black folks from communities across the country to design and implement and win policy that is reflective of not only the challenges that we're facing in our communities, but the most innovative and visionary solutions to those challenges. We know that there's a lot of work that can be done in cities and states, and we don't have to wait for 2020 or the presidential election to make change. And really, we want to make sure that our communities have the tools in our hands to be able to shift what's happening at state houses and not waiting on politicians, legislators, lobbyists, or whoever else to do it. We can be just as powerful in those spaces. The other thing that we will do through that institute is we will be putting out our own analysis of how to understand this data, how to understand some of the contradictions, but also what people need to do about it. I think what we hope for is that the community organizations that have been toiling away, howling like a voice crying out in the wind, can actually use this as a platform to lift up the work that they've been doing and the solutions they've been trying to advance. And so for us, this is really about trying to create a platform that can uplift what people who have been dealing with these problems for a very long time already know about how to solve them. And so we'll be using our Policy Institute to do that, and we'd love to come back and talk to you once it's launched.
Oh, we definitely want that, because it's like you're providing a social science basis for grassroots organizations so that they can, and it sounds like so that they can justify many of the advocacies that they're fighting for with actual social science data that can back them up.
Absolutely.
Now, now, do we have for Tamika Mallory and for Conrad Tillard, do you have more questions to ask, to jump in, because I think that this is so rich.
I do have one question. I heard you talk about the diversity in terms of the different categories of folks that you surveyed. What is the educational range of your participants? Do you have anything on that? Is this a group that everyone has a high school diploma, college degree, master's degree? What's the range in the educational level?
It's actually a pretty wide range, and I want to look here just specifically for New Jersey. But while I'm doing that, I should just say that 47% of our respondents nationally were from the South. An equal number of our respondents made less than $50,000 a year and more than $100,000 a year. And so we did try to be very judicious just in terms of making sure that the people who are responding to this survey weren't just people who were taking ethnic studies classes in universities, right?
Right.
These were, that there was a wide range of experience that was reflected, and that was also a part of our partnerships with the community-based organizations, who literally went door to door and sat at people's kitchen tables and talked with them while they did the survey.
I'm glad I'm not the only person that understands the dichotomy, and you sound, I won't say you're as cynical as I am about those sitting in urban studies courses, or it's not that I don't respect, and obviously I love our students, and I love our folk in universities, et cetera, but I'm just aware of the wide gap that exists between the condition of African Americans in these institutions, or people who have gone through these institutions, and the masses of our folks. And I think that is getting lost in as much as that you have so many folk today speaking for Black people, that when you really begin to evaluate what is their experience working with African Americans, particularly at the grassroots level, you find that much of that experience is very much lacking. And that's what I think we're getting into, this imposing upon the African American community an agenda is in many ways very disconnected from the reality of the average Black person. I mean, it's one thing to talk about global warming and the environment. I don't like folks who have SUVs and people who have huge mansions talking about it anyway, lecturing people who are in a project apartment with trying to figure out how they're going to deal with rats on the 14th floor and lead paint, et cetera, and bad water in Flint, telling them that the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't make what kind of changes? I mean, that's the kind of disconnect that really gets to me.
I really like the focus on policy and what you're doing. I work with high school students, and I have a huge question for you. In that, there are popular arguments that say, like I'm a debate coach. I work with kids who are debating issues all the time, and issues of debating policy, like you're talking about, are huge. They say that we've gone from slavery to Jim Crow to the prison industrial complex. And every time we deal in policy, we are simply recreating all of those negative things. And they would even go as far as saying, working with the government, doing politics in the way that you're talking about, going toward policy and looking at these solutions is pointless. It will just give us hope, false hope, and it will just be crashed because white supremacy will simply continue to destroy the things that we're working at. What would you say to them?
Well, I'd want to be honest with them that certainly without any challenge, white supremacy will absolutely attempt to not only take you over, but suck you dry and make sure you never show up again. But the question for me always is, you can never have policy for policy's sake, and you can never expect that policy is going to solve all problems. There is always an interrelationship between culture and policy. And in order to get good policy, you have to create the kind of culture that supports the desire for good policy. And so, for us, I think as an innovation and an experimentation lab that's really focused on engaging Black communities civically from a different perspective than shaming Black people for not voting or telling people that voting is the ultimate answer. We have to also be honest with our people, not just about the limitations of systems that were not designed to have us participate in making decisions over our own lives. Those systems were absolutely designed for wealthy white landowners to get power and to hold power. And yet Black people and our resistance in this country has been the only thing that has gotten this country even a little tiny bit closer to the promises that it has made to everyone. And so without Black resistance and without Black struggle, it will never, ever change, and white supremacy will win. So that's what I would say to your students.
So that you, and does anyone else want to add to that because all of us have to deal with this in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Like for Tamika Mallory, how would you deal with that? Or
Finding that balance is very,
Right.
very difficult. It certainly is because, as you said, you don't want to shame Black folks into saying that if you don't vote, you're like a horrible person. But you also don't want to allow, Black folks to feel like we don't have to participate. And so that's definitely a difficult place to be. And I would, yeah, I guess my question, not even a question, but something I would love to hear you talk about is how we really even get past the idea of the presidential piece and really push our people into understanding our local politics even more and how them to use this data that you all have been able to collect to show them how important it is for you to be involved in your local politics because that's really where the rubber meets the road in terms of their everyday lives.
like all politics are local, which is a great segue. We're actually getting ready to wrap up. We are actually it's at the 7 o'clock hour, and this has been just such a really great conversation.
Yeah,
for us to have.
and by the way, I want to apologize for Mitty. He actually, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, we had a number of shootings in the city overnight, and so the mayor had an emergency meeting at City Hall. He got hung up in. So once again, he wanted me to apologize not only to, of course, you, Alicia Garza, but of course to his co-host, to Tamika, and to Conrad.
And
Okay.
and yes, because those are actually we opened up the show in terms of talking about some of those
Yeah.
things that were going on. And I think that where we are at the point of asking that last question, like totally changing things up. And
Yeah.
so, well, first, we want to have you back, and we need to have a more extensive conversation. Because I think the last questions that we were talking about in terms of, hey, how do we deal with the actual cynicism that's legitimate and yet still pursue policy? I definitely want to do that. But
Can I add one thing just before she wraps up? I just want to just add 2 second. The idea is that we have to remind our folks that when you have a quibble, you have arrows in your quiver. Voting is simply one of those things. You will not find any group that expects voting to do everything, but it's a vital thing we must do, but it certainly will not solve all of our problems. So it's just one of the many things that we must do.
Oh, thank you. And Lisa Garza, we want to leave you with the final words to wrap up this segment. But in your final words, please tell us who your favorite hip hop artist is, individual or group, because we ask this to all of our guests, and we want to make sure that you are able to. We give you that so that you can give that to our audience. And
The only one that didn't answer that
Jesse
question,
Jackson.
of
Right,
course, is
right.
Reverend Jackson.
We forgot to even ask Jesse Jackson the question. We got caught up in the rhyming.
Okay, at least he didn't refuse. He didn't refuse. He
No,
just
no.
wasn't asked. Okay,
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean? I bet his answer would have been good. I'm going to go with MC Light
Nice.
as my favorite hip hop artist.
You hear that, Rhino?
I mean, you might have expected me to go with Hawk, which, I do love. But I feel like we need to give the sisters some love today.
All right.
Nice. My favorite, probably someone makes my top 5 right now is No Name. I love her absolutely. So yeah, to the sisters, bring it way back to MC Light. I love that. Our DJ's gonna be rocking that. So
Yes, please.
absolutely.
I'll just say for the final word that, one, I want to give a lot of appreciation to all the grassroots organizations that rocked with us this last year and helped us make this happen. So BLM Patterson, big shout out to Nelly Amani and the crew. And also, if you're interested in learning more about the Black Census Project or the Black Futures Lab, you can just visit us at blackfutureslab.org. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on all the social platforms. It's just Alicia Garza or Chasing Garza on Instagram. And if you want to shoot us an email, you can just email us at holla@blackfutureslab.org.
HOOLA? I mean HOLLA?
Correct.
All right, holla at blackfeatures.org.
Exactly. You can also access the reports that we've released on our website for free, and we'll be releasing 2 more this year. one that looks specifically at the responses by gender, and another that is looking at the responses by generation. So be on the lookout for those as well.
Thank you so much. I absolutely love and appreciate the work that you do. Thank you to our co-host, Tamika Mallory,
Thank you
and Reverend
so much.
and Reverend Tillard.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much.
Wonderful
Yeah, great
conversation.
work.
No, thank you.
Great weekend and great week to you all.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
and
Peace.
Much
geez,
love.
and now we're back with All Politics on Local, America's number one political hip hop radio talk show. We have DJ Rhino, who's getting ready to take it away, and then afterwards we will be joined by Asia Norton, the wonderful Asia Norton, who always has the wonderful guests. And her two guests are going to be, and well, she's going to bring two guests, and the two guests are going to be, and okay, so Allison James Friesen and Janique Flournoy Hamilton. So we're going to be joined with a wonderful conversation from our wonderful co-host and our our elected member of the Newark Board of Education, Asia Norton. So DJ Rhino, you do what you do, man.